afternoon to everyone here and good morning to our Western Australian counterparts. Welcome to part one of our AVETMISS webinars. I'm Charissa and with me today is my team member Rowan.
Hey there everyone.
Yep, so today we're going to show you how to troubleshoot common AVETMISS errors that may arise when submitting your end-of-year data to NCVER. This is really relevant because we're so close to our mandatory reporting period for 2020 data. And this is usually a very frustrating and hair-pulling period for most of us RTOs. Now, we understand that most of you may already be aXcelerate clients, but for anyone new joining us, we hope this gives you a really nice idea of how easy it is to detect and clear your AVETMISS problems in the system. So we have received your questions through the sign up page and we'll be responding to those minor queries via follow-up email. For anything more involved, we intend to look at these at our next webinar. I do encourage everyone here to throw in as many questions as you want into the chat window on the right of your window as we go along, so that we can tackle them in part two. So if you can think of any questions along the way, feel free to drop them in the chat window. Now, in aXcelerate, we have a very convenient tool that allows you to perform a pre-validation check against your reporting data. It is important to remember that this is not the full validation check that NCVER will typically run against your net files, but this is in fact designed to pick up the most common errors. Please note that we do have an integration with the NCVER portal that allows you to fully validate your net files within aXcelerate. We will not be demonstrating this today as it requires a valid login to the NCVER portal itself. But we'll be providing links to other videos on how you can set up and use this feature. So for today, we'll just be sticking to aXcelerate's pre-validation tool to detect the most common errors in your data. Okay, let's get started off. Yep. And look at setting up our reporting parameters. Okay. So to get started using this pre-validation check, what you want to do is to head towards reports in your aXcelerate account and go into the AVETMISS tab. All right, just waiting for the internet. All right, so if you do have your NCVER integrated into aXcelerate, you will see the following drop down. If you do not have your NCVER integrated, then you'll only see the aXcelerate option. So for today's purpose, we will just stick with the standard aXcelerate option. But if you were to use the NCVER integration, you have these options of either uploading the net files directly to NCVER, or you can kill two birds with one stone and select this option. If you're wondering how to get started with your NCVER integration, you may have noticed that there is an NCVER validation, so that's the first step. Moving on to the collection period, we are going to select 2020 because that's what we are reporting against. So I'll select the year. The dates are populated by default, so you do not have to set anything here. And with the collection type, I'm going to swap it to end of year. So these are the options you are presented with. With the state reporting format, it defaults to the state you're in, but for today's purpose, we are going to go with the national and NCVER reporting format. So I'll select this one. As we go down the list, you will notice that the net 30A option is ticked. Now you must remember to untick this option because this does not relate to national reporting. If in doubt, always head towards the gray circle because it does give you a little blurb on what this does. So this is not related to our national reporting purpose. Now, you can skip classes to include and also convert NY outcomes. I'm going to head straight towards the funding source and I will be unticking 11, 13 and 15. So this is something you may consider doing. I'm going to tick 20, which stands for full fee paying students, and that's what's been captured in the national reporting format. If you are a Cracos RTO, you will also consider ticking 30, 31 and or 32 because they relate to your international students. But for today, I'm just going to stick with the domestic full fee paying students. One other field or one other tick box you can consider including is also this include blank. So this is a really important tick box to tick as well.
For anyone wondering, those 11, 13 and 15 codes usually refer to just state-funded students. So reporting nationally, we don't really need to tick those. And that include blank will make sure we pick up people who might actually be causing errors, and they'll be left out of the report if we leave it unticked.
That's right. So you will see later on why this is handy, because there are circumstances or situations where the course administrator has simply forgotten to enter a value. So this is always really handy to tick off. Now, for normal reporting purposes, you don't really have to tick anything else, and we can simply, once you've got these parameters set, we can simply go ahead and run the AVETMISS report and see what sort of errors pop up in our account. All right, so I will get Rowan to take over.
All right, so now that we've actually got a report run, we're going to dive in and look at the errors that it's found and go through the process of fixing those. So returning back to the system, you can see after running that report, it's come back with a few errors in pre-validation. So as mentioned, this isn't the full NCVIA integration, so it's not going to pick up every possible error, but the really obvious ones that would probably cause a problem anyway are going to be detected by our system up front. We're going to work through the order and go through each of the NAT file components that is making up this AVETMISS submission. Now we can see up top, we have an issue in the NAT10 file, the training organization one, and handling an aXcelerate, you can actually dive into these and not only find out what the error is, but also where it's coming from in the system. So right now, we've got one single problem of training organization identifier being blank. This is also known as your RTO code. Now, if your account's been properly set up, it's pretty unlikely that you'll actually see this because most of you have probably got your RTO code entered. However, in this case, we've neglected to do so, so we're getting this error. Now, this will kind of flow through and affect a number of other areas in the system if it is forgotten. It'll go all the way down to here. You can see the NAT 130, that error is still coming up. But really, the source of the issue is way back at this first file here. So it's best to work through these errors in descending order where possible. That's how this file structure will often follow. And we're going to click this here to dive into where aXcelerate thinks the problem is coming from. This will pop us open in a new tab. We'll let it load through, and it's brought us to the RTO vet settings of our system settings. The problem, as we can see in this section here, is this field is empty. We don't have an RTO code. So I'm just going to put in a number there. That's probably not a real RTO number. Maybe it is. We're just doing it for demonstration purposes and entering that here. There is also this. This would only be used if you are a RTO reporting to Queensland state funding. So we don't need to touch that today. We're focusing on the national stuff and we need to have this filled. For anyone wondering, we have indeed been brought to the RTO vet settings. This lives under your system settings, but rather than navigating all the way there, you can rely on the error report to direct you to that right place. What I'm going to do is just save that for now, and we'll check how that error gets cleared in a minute. And after saving that, we're going to close down this tab because the original report is still across here. So you can safely click these links and open them up, fix the errors, and then return back here to get back to your other errors. With that out of the way, we'll move down and quickly check this NAT20, the delivery location. And this reports errors coming from your accredited delivery locations. Now, often these will be simple cases of misspellings, or perhaps the postcode doesn't match the AusPost register. In this case, we're actually getting an error about the RTO number again. Now, this is maybe a little awkward at first, since if we click here, this is going to take us to the delivery location that's causing the problem, like so. And you can see there's really nothing in here about that training organization identifier. There's just things about the delivery location. So if this identifier or postcode was wrong, we'd probably get errors around that, but it's really complaining about the RTO code. So to fix this error, you actually need to go to the same area we went to for this one. This is an identical error. It's affecting more than one component, but the area to fix it is still back in the vet settings like we did before. So what I'm going to do now is we're going to rerun this report as we've actually already fixed that number. So we're going to run this again with the same parameters to see how the error gets cleared. Let's do that now. We can hit rerun report. And it runs through, and you can see now both of those are just gone. So it's very easy to run through to check problems and clear them after you've fixed a few errors, just to make sure you're on the right track. All right, Let's continue on to the other components. We're going to dive into the NAT30 file, the program. This is where information about your accredited qualifications is normally stored, so your course scope, as it were. If we drop that down, we've got a number of errors in place here. We'll start with this one like so. It's primarily complaining about the program identifier. The qualification code is far too long. The maximum according to TGA is only allowed to be 10, and we've well exceeded that. Now, the reason this is occurring, as you can probably guess, is this is actually an internal qualification, and for some reason it's showing up in our accredited reporting. So we need to tell aXcelerate to just stop doing that, basically. If we click here, it'll take us straight to that problematic qualification. And we can see here it's extremely long qual code sitting up top. Now, the reason that this is being included is because we've neglected to tick this option here, Unit of Competency Enrollment Only. When you tick this option, you effectively tell the system to stop reporting this qualification as an actual accredited course. This one most certainly isn't, so we should stop including it in the NAT files as it's already doing so. So I'm going to tick that there, and that should be good to go. Now, do note that if there are any accredited units inside of this qualification, those should still be reported. So for example, down in here, you can see these units here. If any of you have run a business course, you would probably recognize these codes. These are actual accredited units. So we'll only tick this option here because we don't want to report the qual. It's not a real collection of units. There's no sort of program with that. However, these units still do need to be reported. So we'll leave it as is. However, if you are running a course where the qualification is internal and every single unit is also internal, so it's just in there maybe to hold your e-learning or run an internal training course with no accreditation, then I would advise also going down and unticking the vet flag as well. In this case, we still have accredited units, so although we will tick the Unit of Competency Enrollment Only, we're still going to leave this ticked because there's accredited training involved. I'll do Submit now to save that. And that should deal with that lengthy unit code error. The actual problem isn't really the code, it's the fact that we're putting it in the files. If any of your accredited qualifications do come back with the exceeding the maximum length, my advice is to check training.gov, make sure you've actually put in the correct code and that you're matching what they've written. There's a chance a spelling mistake or a space may be making it longer than what you intend, thus tripping up this error. Below this, we've got a few other errors, and this mandatory nominal hours problem is actually occurring for our accredited quals, not just the internal one we mistakenly reported. So if we click through onto this, we can take a look at where that's coming from. The result of that error is from underneath all these units, is the nominal hours field, which you may have just seen before. You see it's got a red star here indicating that you'll probably need to fill this in at some stage. And this should be the total normal hours for the course of study. So as a student does this qualification, they'll go through X number of nominal hours. Exactly what this is may vary depending on your situation. Often you can just total up the nominal hours for all the units within it. But if you have any doubt, I would advise contacting the Department of Education for clarity. For our purposes today, we just need to have a number in there at all. If it's left as empty, it will constantly error. So I'm going to put an estimated figure of 600 nominal hours here. Upon saving that, that is now locked in place. And like before, we can close down these two tabs since we're done checking and clearing errors. We'll return to our report and give that another run. We can now see that our program's errors have gone down notably. We haven't fixed the nominal hours for this, so we're still seeing this problem, but the other qual now has nominal hours, the other diplomas were reporting fine, and the internal qualification is no longer being reported, so we're not seeing that error either. Moving on, once again, we're going to jump down to the NAT60 file, and these relate to the actual units of competency themselves, not just the overall qualification. And we can see in here, we've got a very similar set of errors. First and foremost, another problem about the subject identifier exceeding maximum length. Again, as you can probably guess, this is not an accredited unit. This is another internal one. The reason it's showing up here is because when we created it, we've neglected to hide it from the system. If I go on through, the default when creating a unit is to leave this unit of competency type as accredited. And because of that, it's reporting this giant code and we're getting errors. So as you can probably tell, we want to flick this over to internal, which is going to hide it from the system. It'll still be included in everything we need to, but it won't be part of your AVETMISS data anymore. So I'll enter that. That should resolve that there. Excellent. We'll then return and look at these others, and you can see we're getting another nominal hours error, but this time they're for specific units of competency. So if I dive into this first aid one over here, you'll note that this normal hours field is in fact empty. And if that's been left like it is, it'll just constantly cause an error. So we need to have a value in there. I'll put just a default of 5. Now, if you have different normal hours for the same unit in maybe different states that you deliver things in, you can accommodate for that with this add overrides button. So our default state here is Queensland, so it would use 5. But if we delivered a course in, say, Victoria, maybe it's a little shorter. So we can say for Victoria, it is in fact 4, hit add, and then we've got a variant like that. So the default is 5, but if we change to reporting from Victoria, it'll move to 4 instead. A small point that I'd like to bring up for anyone who does a lot of RPL style courses, where there's not really much training delivery, it's normally just evaluating materials and recognizing that prior learning. In those cases, you'll still need to put some sort of number in there. Now, that's purely to get around the error that's being displayed. If you leave this as blank, as empty, it's always going to put an error in the system. And when you come to here, you'll see a whole stack of this going on. So even if you do RPL, we recommend just putting in an associated recommended number of nominal hours there. When you run the AVETMISS report, our system will look at the outcome codes, and if a student has a code of 51 and RPL against that unit, it will set the normal hours to 0 for you. However, if you have this empty, it'll try and put it at 0, but it will also be putting errors in here, so it will get quite confusing. So even for those RPL people, do fill in some sort of normal hours, but don't worry about reporting like training hours. That won't go through. It will still use the RPL code to reset that down if need be. So that covers our first stack of errors up top. I'm just going to go ahead and fill this in, save what we've done to this unit, make sure it has some nominal hours. We'll then rerun this once more, and we should be able to see in the subject that again, our errors have gone down. Still got a few to fix, but the first 8 in the internal are no longer appearing. All right, so I'm going to head back to Charissa now, who will take over, and we'll go through the rest of the errors that are still sticking in our report.
Alright guys, so don't forget, if you do have any questions relating to what Rowan has covered so far, please don't forget to put your questions in the chat window. We're more than happy to address those questions. We're going to continue on with looking at the net 80 errors. So the net 80 errors relate to the student or the contact itself, and you can see that predominantly there are just a couple of errors that are popping up. If we look at Xavier Blaine's error, it is flagging that the USI number is blank. So all you've got to do is to click into Xavier Blaine's name. The tab opens up onto where you can address the error directly. I am going to scroll down his contact profile page to the USI area. So all you've got to do is to pop a USI number in, hit the submit button, and then verify the USI. Now, please don't forget that we do have a USI integration. So if you have not integrated the aXcelerate with the USI registry, this will be a very handy time to do so now. All right, so that's what you do for the USI error. Now, moving on, we are looking at Rolf. Rolf's error is flagging as the street number being blank. So if I click into Rolf's contact profile, it's once again going to take you into the update page. Now you will see that there is an address being popped in there. However, there is no street number, and that's what aXcelerate's error is flagging. So all I have to do is just insert a street number, and perhaps just to make it more complete, I'll just pop in a street address, random one, okay, and simply hit the update contact button. Now, at the same time, while I'm on the contact address page or contact address section, what I also want to stress is if you're a Cricos RTO delivering to international students, don't forget that you can set the state, or you have to set the state to OVS, that stands for overseas. And against the postcode, the correct way of reflecting the postal code is to type OSPC. So this is only for Cricos colleges delivering for international students.
Our pre-validation won't show that as an error, which is why we aren't seeing that on our system. But when you do your final submission to NCEVA and you've not put those OSPC or OBSs in, they'll definitely tell you the error at that point.
That's right. So just take note of that. Okay. So now that I've corrected Rolf's address, I'm just going to quickly run the report again and make sure that that disappears. So if I open up net80 file, you'll see that Rolf has now disappeared from the error list. Now moving on to the next set of errors, very similar. These are the net85 files that relates to the student's postal address. So as you can see, once again, Rolf's error has popped up again. Must be something wrong with the address street name. I must have taken it out. But I'm also going to look at Gordon's profile. So if you jump into it, this relates to the postal address. So once again, there is no number relating to it. So I am going to enter a value against both numbers. Perhaps set the city to Brisbane and simply hit the update button. If I were to run the report again, let's have a look at the net85 files. It has reduced to 1 and taken Gordon off the list. Okay, now we're moving on to the net90 and net100 files. At this stage, aXcelerate's pre-validation tool is picking up that it's got no errors. However, that does not mean, and that's not to say that you will not have any errors detected when you submit to NCVER. It's just that in aXcelerate's mind or its detection, it just hasn't flagged anything significant. All right, so do look out for the disability or prior education errors. If they do pop up, they just need to be updated accordingly based on what NCVER tells you. Moving next to one of our net files with the biggest errors is the net120 file. So as you can see, there are heaps of errors here, and that is because the net120 file or training activity looks at all unit related data. This ranges from unit outcomes to dates to funding sources. All right, so it could be the dates not matching the outcome codes and that sort of thing, or missing information. So we're going to look at Xavier's profile and see what's going on with his units. So jumping into Xavier's student enrollment page, it takes you straight into where the errors are occurring. At the top of the page, you may find this quite a familiar sight with your own accounts. There is a box flagging that the dates, the unit dates, are just not matching the outcome. So let's scroll down to where the units are. All right, we'll see that the first unit, there is a red X against the end date, and that is because aXcelerate is telling you that the end date of this unit does not match the status. This is a continuing activity status, which indicates that the student is still studying or still progressing through this unit. However, we are indicating in the system that the student has completed this unit. So to fix this error, the end date should either be pushed down the track to a future dated date to indicate that this student is still studying, or to simply change the status to competency competent or competency not yet achieved.
So that should probably, if we push those dates out to 2021, then that should actually clear up that error.
That's correct. Yep, because that's not part of the 2020 reporting period. Next, very similar for the second one. Now for the third unit, this is flagging as an error because the date is set this year. So if this student is competent for the 2020, and this is in the future, so we need to backdate to a date that's in the past. Now these NYS errors, once again, they're occurring because the end dates or the start dates do not match the status. Here we've got NYS, that stands for not yet started. However, the start dates on this page are indicating that the student has started, so the start dates are simply not matching the outcome codes. So if you're wanting to quickly change all the dates to or outcomes to what they should be, we do have a bulk tool, so you may be utilizing this already. So under the bulk tool, I'll just change all the units to competent and maybe just simply change the end date to, let's backdate these to 2020.
You would, of course, set this to what the student actually has to your account. We're just setting these competent to put them in a state where the errors won't appear anymore.
That's correct. So we're just doing a demonstration here to show you how to fix the errors. And I'll just submit that and go OK. So this is how you can potentially bulk set the outcomes, and now you'll see that the errors have sort of disappeared. Now this error is showing up because the end date is after the start date. So it's just a matter of pushing it out to a more logical looking end date. So if I were to rerun the report for Xavier again, these errors should effectively disappear, and you'll see that it will look a lot better. So let's open up training activity. You can see that the number of errors against Xavier has reduced. Now let's look at the next error that's popping up against the 120 file, and that's the mandatory funding source national field. If we jump back into Xavier's profile again, this particular error is in fact referring to this area over here, this field. So the funding source national is currently blank. And if you remember earlier, we encourage you to tick include blank under the funding source when setting up your AVETMISS parameters. This is exactly what it's going to pick up. So the administrator here has forgotten to insert a funding source, so I'm just going to select a domestic full fee paying student in this way. Scroll down and simply hit the update enrollment button. Okay, so if you were to do this in bulk and you're not wanting to set the funding source against each student individually, if the funding source is indeed all the same across every student in the class, you simply jump into the class hyperlink shortcut over here to take you into the class matrix page. Okay, so in this page, we have 3 students. Potentially all their funding sources are missing. So you can in fact set a bulk funding source here by going into bulk actions, head to bulk set contracts, and you will see that against the funding source, it allows you to bulk set the funding source against all students. So you can simply check these 2 students and update the selected funding source. Okay, and that's how you update the funding source in bulk. If I were to head back to the AVETMISS field, basically, so the funding source does, the next thing we want to look at is, as we scroll down, is the delivery mode. Okay, so the next error, so these fields are pretty much similar, and that's addressed by changing the funding source. The next error you'll see pop up is the delivery mode identifier. Now this particular error, if you were to click into the student's profile, it's not going to tell you where or how to fix this error because it does not sit in the student enrollment page. The delivery mode error in fact relates to units of competency. So if you were to jump into the units of competency, okay, and I'll just click into a random unit. Okay, so earlier on you learned that you have to set nominal hours, but at the same time you do have to set the delivery mode as well for AVETMISS reporting. So that error you saw on the pre-validation page is in fact referring to the unit of competency delivery mode. You would then want to select the correct mode for the delivery of your course, be it internal, external, workplace, or a combination of both or more. All right, so once you correct those errors, the errors relating to the delivery mode identifier will disappear accordingly.
There's a similar one there too for William Gardner. It's not delivery mode, it's delivery location, which you can see, it's just above that error. If you're getting that, it does refer to a field that generally should have been filled in when you were setting up the class. If we click through to William Gardner again.
Yep, so let's jump back into William Gardner.
You'll see near the top of the enrollment, there's a delivery location field that should generally be filled in. You can fill this in student by student to resolve this error, but arguably you should probably set it at the class level because that will affect every student in the class and save you a lot of clicking. So if we go into that first aid class, you'll probably see that it hasn't had a delivery location set. So if we put that in there, that should flow through to all the students within and probably clear a stack of errors.
Yeah. Okay. So essentially you'll notice that most of these errors are relating to units, locations, or modes, as well as dates and outcomes. So as we hit down the list, we're not going to clear all these errors in our demonstration today. but this is just to demonstrate all the common errors that can potentially come up in your Net 120 file. Now finally, we're going to look at the Net 130 file over here at the bottom of the page. Currently that is looking good. There are no errors flagged, but once again, do note that this does not mean that it is completely error-free. So if your NCVR report does come back with errors, please make sure to change it within the system. If I were to run this report, it's not going to clear all the errors, but you'll see that they are significantly reduced.
We started at, what, 198, and we're already down to 170 with a couple of clicks.
That's right. So once you're ready to submit your files to NCVR, you can do it through the NCVR portal if integrated. If you're not integrated at the moment and you may find that you don't have time to do it, you can simply download the net files by clicking on this button, and that provides the zip file for you to process your NCVR reporting. Now finally, if you are still struggling with the errors and you're just lost and want a bit of extra help, don't forget to use the aXcelerate Assistant tool. So that's the little colored question mark up there at the top. This is our handy, trusty aXcelerate Assistant that provides you with help guides relating to where you are in the system. So when you click on this, you will see that there's a lot of AVETMISS reporting shots, webinars, as well as help articles. You can jump into any one to have a read or watch the videos. And with this particular article here, if you click into that, you can either go through the AVETMISS reporting guide or simply click more to take you into a matrix of errors, and it actually tells you exactly how to fix up those errors. So it does cover all that we've covered today and gives you some tips and tricks on how to resolve these common errors. All right, so now on to Rowan to wrap up today's session.
Yeah. All right, guys. So that about brings us to the end of today's webinar. Thanks again for all joining us, and I hope this has given you an idea of how you can troubleshoot and resolve some of the common AVETMISS errors you can pull up with aXcelerate's pre-validation tool. I hope it gives you an idea of how easy it is as well to actually locate the problems and fix them, and it can be even more involved should you be using the NCVR integration. Now, if you popped any questions in the chat, as mentioned before, we'll be addressing any minor ones with a follow-up email. But for anything more involved, we would like to put that together for another potential webinar, sort of a part 2 to this one. On that note, if you encounter any sort of gnarly, more involved, interesting AVETMISS errors that we have not covered today, do feel free to let us know, again, to put into that part 2. And in relation to that as well, part of the sign up for part 2 will be an opportunity to put all your feedback for that as well. So we would just like as much information as you go through this busy AVETMISS reporting season. If you come across an error that you're really not sure how to resolve, or it keeps coming, you can fix it, but you wonder if there's a better way to do that, feel free to send it through, and we'll all discuss it during our next session if that goes on ahead. So please go by on a website newsletter for that coming up. And otherwise, thank you very much for joining us today as we clear through some errors. See you guys.
All right, see you everyone.
So my name's Sam and I am the lead product designer here at aXcelerate. It's really relevant for anyone who is interested or has experience with e-learning and that sort of thing. So yeah, it should be pretty much, if you work at an RTO, you should be pretty familiar with the different types of e-learning and sort of how you create them and what you can include. So I think it's just, yeah, creating more options which are more in line with, you know, normal or purely e-learning based authoring tools. We also did it in a way where we really focused on making it work well on mobile devices as well. So that's been a focus of all the new question types as well, making sure they respond nicely on a small device. Yeah, so mark the regions, it's really about identifying homogeneous content within a particular image. So if you had to label both wheels on the bicycle, then that would be a good one for mark the regions.
Yep. Cool.
Yeah.
And what about label the regions?
Yep, so label the regions basically lets you create a region and give it a name.
Yeah.
And then the student will see the name as a label on their end, which then they have to place correctly in the region that you've created on the authoring side.
Cool.
The matching list is, basically about creating a list of either images or definitions and having the student choose correctly the term which matches up to either an image or a definition provided.
Cool.
Yep, so ordering's a pretty simple one, but can be a really awesome tool to evaluate knowledge of different processes or orders that certain actions must be performed in. So you'll set up the list in the correct order, and the learner will then receive a jumbled version, which they'll have to rearrange into the correct order. Question 10 of your quiz is upload this document which you needed to fill out, and we want to include that as part of this assessment, but we didn't want to give that particular upload like a whole assessment, which is what you had to do previously. Yeah, so the new content type, previously within assessments, every item that you included had to be accessible in some form. So content basically just removes that restriction and lets you add whatever you like in those steps in a HTML format, as you normally would in the editor. So videos, images, text, it doesn't really matter. When the student views that in the Learner portal, they'll just have to read it and then press next, rather than have to respond to it in any way.
Sweet.
My name's Julian Tetsworth, and I'm a user experience developer at aXcelerate. Government-funded payments has always been a particular pain point for a lot of clients, since it's always something that RTOs need to do, but it's always something that's very complicated and needs a lot of meticulous work to do. And so that's why it's been something that we've gone out to implement into the system to be able to make this a much more easy process, as well as give a lot more visibility to the data that you're actually receiving and managing. So it's always been a feature that a lot of our clients have wanted for quite some time, frankly. And when we first kind of set out to do it, the first thing that I guess we were doing was to just get the spreadsheet of payments and just stick that right into aXcelerate. But the approach that we ended up taking after a lot of feedback from clients and engagement and iteration over a few different versions of it was to make sure that we're really comparing what is expected to be received versus what is actually received, to give more transparency to the reporting process, and to also make sure that your and our clients are getting the amount that they're expecting to receive, and be able to see if there's any kind of issues with the data, and be able to manage it more granularly if they'd like to. Just because some other solutions that we've seen and that we originally were looking at were more of just taking the data, sticking it in aXcelerate, and not giving the user the control to be able to look over and report on and evaluate what they're actually receiving. I think the addition of contract loadings was quite interesting, because when we had spoken to clients, then that was one of the parts of the process that usually doesn't get accounted for. That's kind of just held on the government funding side of things, and not really given any control in student management systems typically. But we've created a contract loading framework to be able to apply that to specific schedules and enrollments, so that it will basically affect the expected payment outcome without needing to have a specific variation for each different loading for each different circumstance. So it vastly cuts down the amount of setup that's required. So basically, revenue recognition is when a payment gets received for enrollments, then that might be for a lump sum for an enrollment that might extend across multiple years. And basically what revenue recognition does is this report lets you basically recognize certain parts of that revenue that was received. So throughout the course of what that payment was for, you can recognize that revenue during a particular interval.